Hey, and welcome into the Big Ten Huddle. I'm your host, JR. We've got a lot to talk about going on in the Big Ten. It is our Big Jeff's Insights show. He brings his data every single time. If you are listening on podcast, we will do our absolute best to explain the data to you. But Spotify, YouTube, those different platforms are the best way to consume this type of episode because there are visual aids sometimes needed. The good news is that we never come to you at noon. And so Ohio lawmakers do not have to set any no noon podcasts with us. Jeff, any thoughts on the Ohio the Ohio representative that is trying to ban noon games from the state of Ohio?
The only thing it does is it fuels the Michigan fanboys who use it to say, "Oh, Ohio State's soft." Well, what does a politician in Ohio has to do with the football team? Really, that's quite a stretch. But I guess that's the world of X. They're gonna look for whatever fuel and ammunition they need to make their case. But yeah, it's all pretty juvenile and stupid.
The world of X. Yeah, it's a scary place out there. So if you're on there, you know, just hope you survive. It's a scary place out there sometimes. We got Philip here with us. Philip says Zach's suspension continues. Yep, won't be here next episode either. So we'll see how long Zach's suspension lasts. But I'll be suspended soon. So it'll be Zach on his own with whoever he wants to bring with him. So it'll be a good time. Philip says Ohio State scared of noon and flags. Who would have thought Ohio State's kryptonite would be noon games and flags on the field? Oh, good stuff. Good stuff. All right. Well, Jeff, we got a lot to get to today. We are going to go through the past, 10 years of college football playoffs and
11.
essentially, 11, that's right.
Yeah, it is 11.
Yeah, and we're essentially going to insert them into the 16 team playoff and then look at the data. Obviously, how many at large bids for each conference and kind of compare and contrast a little bit. I'm very interested to see this data if Big Ten still comes out on top, if SEC comes out on top. It'll be very interesting to see. So I'm very, very excited for it. Jeff, do you have anything to add before we start bringing the tables up?
No, other than I made this the topic is just real timely. It just came out, I think, last week, reported just to review the Big Ten and the SEC are pushing, they're the ones really driving this. The Big Ten and the SEC, to be clear, are pushing to expand the playoffs to 16 teams as early as 2026. So that's when the new structure would be happening. And really, the structure they're proposing, to get specific here, is 4 automatic bids for both the Big Ten and the SEC, 2 automatic bids for the ACC and the Big 12 each, 1 group of 5 auto bid, and then that leaves 3 at-large bids selected by a playoff committee, probably very similar to the existing playoff committee, to get to your 16. Good news for the Big Ten as well, though. It's expected with this model, the SEC would move to a 9-game conference schedule that a lot of us in the Big Ten feel they should be doing in the first place, right? So you're not going to see that, early November game against Little Sisters of the Poor that they like to do right before some of the bigger games. So hopefully that would
Just
mean better
just made a
matchups.
video just made a video on that last night for the USC Notre Dame rivalry and how the SEC being on only 8-game conference schedule really does impact that stuff. Now Lincoln Riley's not completely off the hook. All right, I did blame Lincoln Riley on that, but the sole blame going to Lincoln Riley. I think there's a few other factors we have to look at as well. Real quick, and then I'll give it back to you, Jeff. Trojan Fight is here. Hello, Trojan Fight. Appreciate you being here. He says, so it's 12 teams currently, and there was an assumed plan to go to 14, I thought, at some point, but now they want 16. Yes. So the thought
Great
was they
question.
would move to 14 eventually. That has pretty much been expedited to 16. Really, the biggest issue you have here is there's no players union for the players. And I realize that talking about zero player, fairness is kind of not really, uh, you know, matter right now because they're getting paid so much. However, it does impact these players, and I mean, until until they get some say, I don't know when this is going to stop. I wouldn't be surprised if we go to 2024 teams at some, or yeah, 2024 teams at some point. But that's for another podcast. Yes, Trojan Fight. The assumption is that it will move to 16 teams, not this season, but next season, 2026. Okay, back to you, Jeff.
Yeah, the good news there though is ultimately, even when people were talking about the 14 team model, the consensus was it's going to eventually get to 16. So why don't we just get to 16, right? We're just going to skip the whole 14. I actually do believe that it's going to be 16 for a good while. I think that makes the most sense. It's going to be very hard based on wear and tear. And then the schedule. I mean, even as it is, the college football playoff was going up against the NFL playoffs, and that's not good. I mean, as popular as college football is, NFL is still king. And so that's something to be factored in as well. But that was a great question there. And the other element of this is, and I don't really love this, we'll get into this more when we look at certain years. The idea is that there's going to be some interconference play-in games that would help get to the auto bids. So in the case of, the Big Ten and probably the SEC, they're talking about a 3 seed in the Big Ten versus the 6 seed. And then the winner of that game would get the auto bid with the 3 seed probably at home. They don't get into that detail, but I would certainly assume the higher seed would be at home. And then the 4 seed would play the 5. And again, the winner would get one of the 4 auto bids. Now we're going to look at 4 seasons over the last 11 of what that would look like. Some years it makes a lot of sense. Other years I can tell you it's like, oh my God, this is so stupid. And so we'll get to that later in the podcast. I don't really love the play-in part in JR, that that's where you get into that. How many games can you play and how you're going to squeeze them in? I'm not quite understanding how they're going to work that out, other than to say, when you add those, you can say goodbye, I think safe to say, to the conference championship, right? Because that's going to that
I
would
would
be
say the
part of
only
the
way I
answer.
would, or sorry, I was going to say the only way I would like the play-in game is if it ensures that we're seeing a Big Ten versus SEC matchup, that we make sure we get one of those from a 5-5 seed, and or a fifth in the conference versus fifth in the conference over there, sixth in the conference versus sixth in the conference over there. I think that would be really interesting to guarantee Big Ten and SEC matchups. However,
It would be
we'll
cool,
see.
but my reading of it, and of course this is all preliminary, right? Is it would be interconference. Interconference is the thinking right now. So it wouldn't be that model that you're talking about, JR.
Which that would be so lame because you could just get rematches of stuff you already
Oh,
saw this
I'm going to
season.
show you a rematch that's really bad
Oh man.
later,
Okay, good.
and to really support why in some cases it looks okay, in other cases it looks really bad. College football leaders are supposed to discuss this more in depth this summer. So there's going to be more meetings this summer. And I think the anticipation is by the start of the year, they're going to know what the playoff will look like in 2026. So that's the good news with that. And so that's what we're going to do here, right? We're going to look at the last 11 years, really since the start of the 14 playoff, and say, here's what a 16-team playoff would look like, making some assumptions, and then look at specific years. And I'm going to show some summary data as well. And I could say, here's 5 questions we're going to answer by the end of tonight here. Number 1, first question, will the format be good or bad for the Big Ten, SEC, ACC, Big 12, and the Group of 5? And what conferences would have benefited the most among those 5 groups? That's the first question we're going to answer. Number 2, what individual teams would have benefited the most, both within the Big Ten and a quick look outside? Number 3, will the format be good for the Big Ten teams who are not the Blue Bloods? So I want to call it like the mid-tier teams. Like, you're going to get more of those. We're going to look at how many more teams would have gotten access and how often they would have made it. So we're going to cover that for sure. And number 4, are there some undeserving teams that made it where it's like, geez, it's hard to believe this team is in this field, right? And then there's some teams that were deserving that still could be locked out as well. So is anyone getting screwed, really? Like, I don't have an index for that or anything. And then the final thing is, why is the Big Ten pushing for this, and is this good for the game overall? We'll be touching on that throughout this as well. So with that, any questions, JR, before we get to the first table?
Nope, let's do it.
Okay. All right, let's do it. So let's look at table 1. So this is kind of like a summary table. So I'm going to make sure we all understand this. This is playoff appearances by conference over the 11 years from 2014, when the 4-team playoff started, all the way through last year, which was the first year of the 12-team format. Okay. So this is looking at by conference, right? And this data also assumes the current conference alignments. So in the case of the Big Ten, over the 11 years, it assumes the 4 Pac-12 teams that came into the Big 10 last year all were in the Big Ten all 11 years, the past 11 years. Same thing for the SEC and for the other conferences. Hopefully that makes sense. So the second column is the number of guaranteed bids over 11 years. So obviously the Big Ten with the 2 per year, or 4 per year. Sorry, you're going to get 44, right? 40, basically 4 times 11, right? That's how we get to the 44. So that's the number of guaranteed bids. Interestingly, Independence, Notre Dame, no guaranteed bids, right? Even in this new model, they don't address Notre Dame specifically, but because they didn't call it out, by definition, Notre Dame's not guaranteed a bid there. And then the third column is total appearances if the 16-team format was in play for that conference. So what this is saying is, looking at the Big Ten, which is in green, that over 11 years, the Big Ten would have gotten an extra 6 at-large bids for a total of 50 playoff appearances over that 11-year time frame. And I'm doing that based on what the committee ranked as their final rankings after the conference championship games. So that's the rankings I'm using to slot in like the 4 guaranteed Big Ten slots, the 4 SEC slots, etc. All right. And then the fourth column is the at-large bids themselves that I just talked about there. So what's interesting is the SEC leads with 51 appearances in the 16-team format, right? But that's only 1 ahead of the Big Ten. So really, it's kind of a wash there as far as benefiting Big Ten versus SEC when you look at it just from that perspective. The Big 12 gets the most at-large bids with 8, right? So they would have got, the Big 12 again gets 2 per year guaranteed, but over the last 11 years, that 16-team field has them getting 8 at-large bids. So in essence, they benefited the most from the at-large bids in our hypothetical here. And then the ACC only gets 4 at-large bids. So I look at this as, those at-large bids are pretty evenly dispersed, except for the ACC, but they're pretty evenly dispersed, which really tells me, like, one of the insights is, I think the at-large bids of 4 and 4 for the SEC and Big Ten and 2 and 2 for Big 12 and ACC is actually about right? Because based on history, the at-large bids are all fairly equal, which tells me these are the number of schools that deserve a playoff bid coming out of these conferences aligns pretty well with the automatic bids that are in this proposal. And JR, I'm going to give you a chance to give your opinion on that in a minute there, but I just wanted to make that point there. And then Notre Dame is an independent, they wouldn't be guaranteed, but based on the final rankings of the committee after, again, the interconference playoffs, they would have earned 6 playoff appearances, right? So 6 at-large bids. So Notre Dame would have done pretty well. And then the Pac-12 actually, and that's just Washington State, I guess, and Oregon State, right? They would have got 2 appearances from those teams over the 11 years. So really, they wouldn't have done particularly well. And then what's interesting too is, the whole group of 5 concept that they get one auto bid. Well, this format's great for them because they would have got 0 at-large bids. And as we see when we look at a certain number of years, sometimes they were ranked in the top 16, other times they were outside the top 16. So this is very clearly is a great thing for the group of 5 to expand access to them for sure. And so just the other thing I would say is the Big 12 with 8 at-large bids over 11 years, you could argue, the Big 12 could argue, we kind of deserve, based on history, maybe 3 auto bids a year, right? Since we're almost getting a at-large bid per year, pretty close to it, right? 8 of 11 years. So you could make that argument if you're the Big 12. If you're the ACC, though, with only 4 at-large bids out of 11 years, you have no argument to get more than 2. And I'm going to show you later in some years, the ACC is quite lucky to have 2 seeds, 2 auto bids per year, actually, from this format. So I'm going to stop there and ask JR if you have thoughts, and of course, we'll take any questions from the audience too.
Yeah, I think most of all the 8 from the Big 12 at-large bids was eye-opening. However, looking at the fact that they only get 2 auto bids compared to 4 for the SEC and the Big Ten, that obviously plays a factor there. However, it doesn't surprise me. I mean, the Big 12 is a very competitive conference, and sometimes a team that is, you'll have 3 or 4 teams ranked in the top 20, but maybe only one ranked in the top 10, right? That was kind of the issue you had with the Big 12 this last year. Was BYU was doing a great job for most of the year, and then was it they luckily won against Utah, I think it was, or Utah luckily won against them, or something like that. And eventually they got kind of pushed out, and Arizona State came in, won the conference championship, and found themselves in. And they were what? They were the 3 seed or the 4 seed. No, they were the 4 seed in that situation. So, yeah, I mean, the Big 12, it's just such a competitive conference. I really would like to see them in the 16 format, 16 team format without the buys and all this stuff. And Trojan Fight, he's saying I'm good with more teams, I just don't know about the bid stuff. I'm okay with the bid stuff. I do think it gets a little wonky with how the Big Ten and the SEC have 4 and the Big 12 and the ACC have 2. But more than anything, I'm just glad in the 16 team playoff field we don't get the buys, because we're actually going to see teams play like other teams that they are supposed to play based on their rankings in the first round, and that'll be really interesting to see how those two work there. So yeah, I think the biggest takeaway out of this one is just the Big 12 and how competitive they are.
Yeah, and I don't love the guaranteed bids either, but the good news from my view is, based on history, the number of bids that are automatic and by conference seem to be about right on average with how history plays out. The issue is some years you get an anomaly year where things just don't seem to make sense, right? And the auto bids are going to force some years to not make sense. And then you're going to get a bunch of complaining from people versus talking about the games. That's not good in my view. But then again, if you don't have, here's the negative of not having guaranteed bids. Then you're reliant 100% on a committee, and you know what happens with the committee. Then everyone's whining and complaining about the committee anyway, right? So at least with this, it's almost like a little bit more NFL-like, where one conference team, you could go 8-8 and win your division, right? That's just the way it is. And people don't seem to complain about it that much in the NFL. So that's the other way to look at it a little bit too.
Yeah, I agree. And Trojan Fight, he brings up the Big 12 without OU and Texas isn't who they were over that time frame, though. Now, correct me if I'm wrong here, Jeff, but you, for the sake of like seeding purposes and stuff like that, since you were doing 4 teams auto bid, you just included Texas and Oklahoma in with the SEC for all 11 years, correct?
That's right. I mean, it appears to be a good point, but this Big 12 line excludes Texas and Oklahoma. To be clear, all this data is looking at the last 11 years, assuming current conference alignment existed, including Oklahoma and Texas being in the SEC. So that Big
Right.
12, none of these 30, none of the 8 at-large bids include Texas and Oklahoma.
Yeah, which makes it even more impressive for the Big 12. Um, all right, and then some chatter about ASU should have beat Texas. I agree.
Yeah,
All right,
I
let's
agree on
see.
that too.
Yeah. Um, yeah, and you're right, Philip. With auto bids, no reason for conference championship games. Yeah, they just got to get rid
Yeah,
of them. I mean, it's
yeah.
it's an unnecessary game that, at the end of the day, it just puts more stress on the players. But until we get a players association, it's not going to happen because guess what? These TV companies make money from it. They're not going to give that up until there's some type of players association or something to stop them. So, but you know what? The players got no cap on their money, so the TV companies and the conferences are just going to keep using them to get as much money as they can. So, all right, ready to go on the next slide, Jeff?
Let's jump to table 2. Yep. So here we're going to look at appearance by conference of the 16 team versus what I'm calling the 10 years of the 14 playoff, and then last year, which was the 12 team playoff. So that's the 4 and 12 team playoff together. Okay. So this first by conference in the first column, then the second column is appearances if it was the 16 team format. So we saw that column in the previous table, right? But how does that compare with how many teams made it by conference in the old system of the 4 and 12 team playoff? So SEC, 51 in the 16 team, they had 20 in the old format over that 11 years. So they led the charge. Not surprising, right? Especially given Bama's dominance. But the difference was they'll have 31 more individual appearances in the new playoff format, is what this is saying. The Big Ten, pretty similar. I mean, 50, 16 team format appearances, but then 16 appearances in the old 4 and 12 team format. So the Big Ten's actually getting the most additional teams in the new format with 34 teams. And again, this is looking back over the last 11 years, and we're assuming the future may look similar to the past with this, right? We're making some assumptions here. But the other thing to note here is just the pure number of playoff places that the Big Ten and the SEC took. So in the old format, 69% of the playoff field came from the SEC and the Big Ten. In the new playoff format, that percentage is down to 57%. So from 69% for the Big Ten and the SEC in the old format down to 57%. So one of the goals of this was to increase access for other conferences, and that's doing that, right? So whether you like that as a goal or not, that is a stated goal, and for sure it's going to do that. Not surprisingly. So this is good for other conferences, to be very clear. The other thing that's really interesting, the Big 12 there in the third row there in the darker blue. So in the old format, only 3 Big 12 teams made the playoffs over 11 years, right? I mean, it was pretty sad. In the new format, 30 teams will have made it. So 3 appearances is like a 6% of the time they're making it. Now in the new format, the Big 12 is going to get 17% of the spots. So I would argue that for the Big 12, one of our questions we said we're going to answer is, what conferences is this the best for? The Big 12 is going to benefit the most from the move certainly from the 4 team mostly, right, to the 16 team format. The reality is, if it stayed at 12 team, they still would have benefited a lot more, because what we just talked about, the issue with the Big 12 is they haven't had elite teams, right? But they've got a lot of good teams. And so this will definitely reward and get more of those good teams in the playoff, which is exciting for that conference, right? It's kind of a bummer when you don't have a great chance to make a 14 playoff field. So the Big 12, in my view, is going to benefit the most from this. The ACC, I would argue, will be the second biggest beneficiary of this. They only had in the old format 9 playoff appearances over 11 years. 7 of those 9 came from Clemson. So Clemson was just dominating totally. You had Florida State in there for a year, and then I can't remember the other team. I probably have that later. But now, with the new format, 26 teams or 26 spots for the ACC, so that's an increase of 17. That's pretty big for the ACC and very important. And then I think getting in 2 teams is a great thing for the ACC, given how their on-field performance and recruiting has been really bad the last 5 years. We've covered that in previous podcasts. So, some people were like the Big 12 in the ACC when they first saw this, only getting 2, they're getting screwed. My data shows they're not getting screwed. 2's about right. You could argue maybe the Big 12 gets 3, but the ACC with 2, often they don't deserve 2. And my data later is going to show that. So it's a good deal for the ACC and the Big 12. And that goes against what people thought initially. Oh my God, the Big 10 and SEC gets 4. They're screwing people. They're really not. The data does not support that. And then independents, Notre Dame would have gotten the old system. They had 3 appearances, like we just talked about. Now they're getting 6. So that's still good for Notre Dame. And then, the for the group of 5, they didn't have any shot, right? So really you can say the group of 5 of all these groups is going to benefit the most, then the Big 12, then the ACC, then the Big 10, I would argue, and then last, I think, is the SEC would get the most out of this because they were already getting a lot of teams in the old format. So stop there. JR, comments on this one?
Yeah, I thought it was really interesting. Again, what you were saying about the Big 12, no real elite teams. And so that kind of adds to the fact that it helps them in a number of ways. And it was kind of what I was getting at last season when I was talking about the SEC just being a glorified Big 12. Trojan Fight says it. He says, I mean, there's a ton of teams out there that if you took the major players out of the conference would be playoff contenders. Take Georgia and Alabama out of the SEC. That's what we saw this year in the SEC, right? Georgia and Alabama, neither of them were who they normally were. Neither of them were, the de facto #1 team in the nation, favorite to win it all. I mean, Oregon was, Georgia was up there at the #2 seed based off of notoriety pretty much completely. But I mean, you watch that Georgia team all season, they got the benefit of the doubt all season long. They were not a good football team for stretches of the season, and it showed. And that's why the SEC was not the best conference in college football last season. Very competitive, a lot of good teams, but they lacked those elite teams. The 3 teams that were elite in college football all resided in the Big Ten, with Ohio State, Oregon, and Penn State. Now, you could argue Georgia could have beat Penn State or Georgia could have beat Ohio State, maybe. I mean, but that's again hypothetical stuff where we know the SEC loves to live in hypothetical land. But yeah, no, Trojan Fight, I agree with you, and I think we saw it play out last year. You extend that to 16 teams instead of 12 teams, and the SEC gets 6 teams in instead of 3, right? So it just kind of shows how important it is for these conferences that maybe don't have an elite product that's going to for sure win it all, and have some other ones there as well. The ACC, they don't get it because you look at the third, sometimes fourth, sometimes fifth team, or sometimes the third, but the fourth, fifth, and sixth teams in the conference, they're 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 okay teams, but they don't deserve to be in the playoffs. Like Louisville, they're pretty good under Jeff Brom, but Jeff Brom was at Purdue and had some success in the Big Ten West. But I don't think anybody was ever going to argue that Jeff Brom was ever going to win the Big Ten unless some kind of freak accident happened in the Big Ten championship game. It was kind of same way with Kirk Ferentz too. I'm not trying to take a shot at Iowa here. Iowa did a very good job at winning the Big 12. They played a brand of football that was very good for that. But at the end of the day, it wasn't a team that quite frankly was able to throw the ball well enough to beat the big dogs in Ohio State, Michigan, Penn State, and now you add in Oregon, and whatever other teams out west with USC, Washington that start competing with the big boys as well. So, any thoughts on that, Jeff?
Well, I was just going to interject that when you think about it, there's some really good things about this. The fact that we've moved away from divisions, like in the Big Ten specifically, the divisions really prevented us from being as successful as we need to be, and probably prevented us from getting more teams potentially in the playoffs, I think, given how unbalanced it was. And so just getting rid of that, I think, is a good thing. And then I like this playoff expansion. I've just always worried about the over expansion. I kind of like 12, but once they said 14, I'm like, if it's going to be 4, let's just go to 16 then, right? So, but I'm just hoping and praying that it stops at 16. I do think that will happen at least for a while because of it's just difficult to play too many football games, right? And if you have these play-in games that we're talking about, then it really means to expand beyond 16 is going to be very difficult to do just from an injury perspective and from the schedule perspective. But again, my point is getting rid of divisions is another good thing of this process and evolution that we're seeing in the game.
I agree. I agree. Argraw says the SEC wasn't the best conference the past few seasons. Please, people need to stop saying that lie, saying this deepest is even bigger lie. The Big Ten exposed them. I completely agree, Argraw. I hope you didn't take it that I said that they were the best, because I vehemently would disagree that they were not the best. The Big Ten was the best conference this season, the past season, and then you could argue 2 seasons ago they were, but I believe that was Georgia and Alabama in the national championship game together. So that's a pretty hard one to argue, but you can make an argument for the Big Ten was better that season. But yeah, I mean, really, once Nick Saban went away, it was pretty clear. You know, I mean, Nick Saban didn't have a grasp on college football like he did before, and then also, I mean. I don't bring it up a ton just because we don't have a ton of proof on it, but I think it's a pretty general consensus and most people believe it. The SEC was paying people, you know? I mean, now that other schools are paying them as well, the playing field is even. Grateful Trojan brings it up here. He says once all schools were able to pay the players not under the table, the SEC has declined. Yeah, I mean, these teams were hiding it from everybody else in the nation, and they were hiding it from their players too. There's a reason why Kirby Smart came out today and said, I don't want my freshmen making more than my seniors. Well, guess what? They were before. It's just they didn't know about it because it wasn't talked about a whole lot. Now it is talked about. Now you got reporters from On3 going and trying to figure out how much money guys are making, and it's a tough thing. So yeah. Anyway, back to the
The
playoffs
good
here.
thing is that with the expanded playoffs, we're going to get to see more interconference matchups to really know. The way to
Right,
know
and that's why I want those play-in
is
games to
yeah,
be SEC and
yeah,
Big Ten so bad.
yeah. And really that's important because the old, well, we'll know from bowl games the teams playing each other. You don't, because you have too many opt-outs. To me, the non-playoff bowl games, it's like you can't even brag about them hardly at all. I mean, it's just there too many players just sit out, and so you need playing games that matter, like Tennessee at Ohio State or whatever, right? So okay, let's move on just because we got a lot to cover, but good stuff. Good stuff.
Yep.
Table
All right.
three.
Table
All right,
3.
this one, it won't take real long here, but this would be a playoff appearances by team. So what teams really benefited the most? And this is across all conferences. I put in red fonts the teams that benefited the most. But the number one team that benefited the most, and it shouldn't be a surprise because everyone was talking about, oh, the 12-team playoff is going to benefit Penn State the most. Well, this proposed 16-team field would have benefited Penn State the most for sure. So they had one playoff appearance the last 11 years. It just happened to be in the 1 year it expanded to 12. They would have had 7 out of 11 years in the playoffs. That's a difference of 6. So they're the leader more than any team in college football. They would have had 6 more playoff appearances over 11 years. So they're number one. Number 2 is there's 4 teams would have made the playoffs 5 more times. That's Georgia, believe it or not. Remember, everyone thinks Georgia, the juggernaut, but remember, they were stuck behind Alabama and they kept losing to Alabama too in the important games, right? So Georgia would have been in 9 out of 11 years. They only were 4 appearances, believe it or not. So that's a difference of 5. And then we got 3 schools that didn't make the playoffs at all that would have made it 5 times. Oklahoma State in the Big 12, Florida would have made it 5 times and they made it 0. And then good old Lane Kiffin and Ole Miss, 5 times out of 11. So big impact. 3 of those, let's see, 3 of these schools are SEC schools that we're looking at here. And then just to point out, 2 schools had 4. Florida State only made it 1 time with the old formats. They would have made it 5 times in this 16 team field over 11 years. And then Ohio State, they made it 7 times, but they would have made it every year if it were the 16 team format. And then you can see there's other people here. We're going to get into the Big Ten teams, and this is color coded, by the way. The Big Ten is in green rows. I always put the SEC in the brown, pukey, not as nice. And Big 12 is in dark blue, etc. So we're going to look at the Big Ten in the next table, but going to stop here. JR, any surprises or comments on this?
I just appreciate that you put the SEC in the pukey color. I fully endorse that. Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot of surprises here. Oklahoma State is a surprise. It's not a team I would have guessed, but it does make sense now that I kind of think back on it. Wisconsin was a team that I was going to look for right away because they were a team that I felt like probably would have made the playoffs at least a couple of times, and they would have 3 times they would have made the playoffs if it had been expanded to the 16 team format, which is interesting to me. And then it does look like the SEC would have benefited here a little bit more. I mean, you look at some of these SEC teams. Alabama would have had 2 more. Georgia would have had 5 more. Oklahoma would have had 3 more. 5 more for Florida, 5 more for Ole Miss, 3 more for Auburn, 2 more for LSU. There's some Ten teams kind of sprinkled in throughout here, but that's really interesting that the SEC teams would have had 3 different teams that would have been in 5 more times if it had been expanded. That is pretty interesting.
Yeah, definitely interesting stuff. Let's look at the next table, which is going to be Big Ten in more depth here, JR. So just to remind, in the 4-team field, and then the 1 year of the 12-team, only 5 of 18 Big Ten teams made it. You had Ohio State, Michigan, and Michigan State. Those 3 of the original, I'll call the original Big Ten teams, and Michigan State only made it once. And then you add in Washington and Oregon. So in this one, I put the former Pac-12 teams in a blue row because I think it's always pretty interesting when you do that. But this is showing, the appearance if the 16-team format. So Ohio State, what we just talked about, all 11 years, 11 of 11. Penn State 7, it would be second most in appearances. Interesting, Penn State would have beat out Michigan. Michigan 6 appearances, Penn State 7 with the 16-team format. It does show the consistency of James Franklin, right? I mean, he's been right there, right close to being what their fans expect of them to be. Washington and Oregon with 5 appearances. Those would have been an increase of 3 each. And then USC would have been 3 times appearing. And of course, they haven't made it 1 time. So that would have been huge for them. And then to your point, JR, Wisconsin would have made it 3 times. There's been some really good Wisconsin teams that were just really close. They couldn't win. Often, if they would have won the Big Ten championship game, they would have been in the playoff in a couple instances, but they just couldn't get it done. Michigan State would have been 3 times instead of 1. And then Northwestern, I'm assuming, I believe that's the 2 times they won the Big Ten West and played in the Big Ten championship game. Iowa would have appeared twice as well. We know Indiana appeared this year, but they also would have appeared in that COVID year. Remember, they went like 6-1 that
2020.
year.
Yep.
So they would have got a second bid there, which would have been really cool under Tom Allen. And then interestingly, UCLA would have got one over those years as well. So really, you're talking about an increase of 34 additional appearances for Big Ten teams from a 16-team format. That's huge, right? And the number of teams in the old system, only 5 of 18 teams would have made the playoffs. In the new system, 12 of 18 teams would have made it. So sorry if you're fans of, here's the teams that wouldn't have made it, the 6: Maryland, Rutgers, Illinois, Purdue, Nebraska, and Minnesota. Those 6 are the only Big Ten teams that would not have made this 16-team format field. JR,
Surprising. Oh, sorry, I was jumping the
good.
gun. Kind of surprising Minnesota wouldn't have made it. When was that? 2021 when they were 10-2, or yeah, I think that was it. Sorry, Minnesota fans, if I'm getting the wrong year, but yeah,
Actually, I
kind of.
think JR, I think our next table is going to show those close misses. You don't have to
Okay.
jump that next, but I think we're going to cover that next, actually.
Okay. Well, we actually have a number of comments here, so I'm just going to go ahead and let the comments
Yep.
speak here instead of myself to get the people their time. R. Graw says, I'm a Penn State fan, and 2016 is infuriating. Beat Ohio State and win the conference and still out Ohio State in over them. Look, I'm an Ohio State fan, and I thought Penn State should have been in over Ohio State, especially after I think that was the year Ohio State lost 31-0 against Clemson. Yeah. I have a lot of I would I have a lot of understanding for Penn State fans in that situation. I'm right there with you, Argraw, even as somebody who's an Ohio State fan. So, Philip says, oh, where's it at?
Actually, I don't disagree with that, but I was pretty infuriated. Ohio State beat one at Penn State, and yet Penn State got a better seeding just because they made the Big Ten championship game. Well, they didn't have to play Oregon on the road. So sometimes it can even out too. But I hear you. In 2016, I do agree with what you're saying.
Right. The comments are not coming up for some reason when I
So Philip,
bring them up. But
can you see it, Phillips? I can see
oh,
it
there it is.
there.
Okay.
Okay.
He says SEC has cooked the books in rankings to make their top teams look good. I assume that's affecting this. No doubt. There has been SEC bias. I would be curious if the 16-team playoff would have made the bias elsewhere, but I kind of like that there is not really affected bias as much in this situation, and that's very interesting to me about
I would just
that kind of
like to
stuff.
say, because I'm a big numbers guy and everything. I don't disagree with people saying the last couple of years the Big Ten, certainly this year, the Big Ten to me was better than the SEC. You could make an argument that 2 years ago. I just remind though, if you look at NFL production, NFL dudes, and having NFL dudes I'm a big proponent. That's how you beat teams, right? You don't have a bunch of pretty good players. You have NFL dudes, and they were an NFL factory for years. Now we could argue were they paid and everything, and that definitely could be. But I don't think all those years that they were really good and got a lot of bids that it was deceptive or they were propped up in a huge way. They were really good. Now, were they propped up maybe more than they should some years? Yeah. But let's not pretend for those years of dominance where they were winning national titles, that's speaking for itself. So I just want to get that out there. But I do think the worm has turned. I think with the last couple of years, I think the tipping point for sure is Saban retiring, right? I mean, he's the GOAT. And the key for conferences, I've said this, you'll hear me say this left and right. You need your blue bloods acting like blue bloods. And man, under Saban, Alabama was the ultimate blue blood, right? Well, he's no longer there. So really, the good news for the Big Ten, we really do have a great opening here to really potentially overcome the SEC as the number one power conference in the nation.
Yeah, and great coaches too. I mean, Ryan Day,
Yeah.
Dan Lanning, James Franklin has the opportunity to kind of prove the narrative wrong in a lot of ways. I think you look at these numbers, and if there was a 16-team playoff, maybe James Franklin is looked at differently, making the 16-team playoffs 7 times instead of only 1 time with the 4 and the 12-team format. So,
And
uh,
imagine if Penn State wins it all. Oh my God!
yeah,
Will we have ammunition on the SEC then, Philip? Right?
yes,
I
yeah,
mean, already with Ohio, with winning back to back, there's huge ammunition already, right?
for
So
sure. All right, I'm gonna go rapid fire a little bit to save us some time. Yes, Grateful Trojan, the 9 conference game, that was a big part of kind of cooking the books too, in my opinion. Only doing 8, but Jeff does make a good point. NFL talent, production, stuff like that. So back and forth a little bit, but I mean, I still say just because you have NFL players doesn't mean it guarantees you something, right? The SEC had over 70 this year, and the Big Ten still won this season, in my opinion. So it is a big factor, but not always the only factor. So Argos says people forget Penn State was consistently beating Michigan before they cheated. Yeah, really before the 3 year period. Yeah, 3 year period for Michigan. Penn State was giving it to them a whole lot more, and some people forget that. Terry says hasn't been there. It hasn't been 11 years, has he? Terry, yes, it has
well,
been 11 years of the playoffs so far. I said 10 earlier,
he's
so I'm
saying
right there with you.
wonder if he's wondering if Franklin's been there. I think Franklin has been there about 11 years. Is he?
Franklin came in 2014, yeah, or 15, one of those two. So yeah, about 11 years.
Yeah.
Um, Dave says, "Are you bashing Minnesota again? Do I have to unsubscribe?" No, 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 Dave. I was actually complimenting Minnesota that they should have been
Yeah.
in with their 10 wins that
And
season.
in our coaching ranking, we gave PJ Fleck a really good grade in that
Oh yeah,
podcast for sure. Yeah, we
yeah.
think highly of him,
Oh
or at
yeah,
least I do.
Brett Bielema and PJ Fleck. I mean, 2 years ago when I made my head coaching rankings, I ranked them both. I think I had Brett Bielema in my top 5, and I think I had PJ Fleck either 7 or 8. And I got so much crap for it. People told me, "Oh, it's stupid, bad ranking." And I told them, I said, "I think these guys are better coaches than you guys give them credit for." And lo and behold, here they are. I don't think there's any doubt those two are Brett Bielema top 5 and PJ Fleck top 7. So, all right. A lot of good comments, guys. We appreciate it. Just can't get to all of them because we do need to get to our next slide here. All right, Jeff, what do we got in this one?
Okay, so on the left, table 5. So these are the at-large bids in order of year. Okay, so the at-large bids. For the most part, I just wanted to highlight. There's 6 of them. 3 of them are 2-loss teams. So Penn State, Washington, and Washington twice actually that went 10-2. And then only 3 times over 11 years would a 3-loss team in the Big Ten, this is on Big Ten only 3 times of the 11 years would a Big Ten would have a 3-loss team got an at-large bid. So what this is telling us is, if you want to make the playoffs, if you go 10-2, you've got a really good shot. But if you get that 3rd loss, you better have some special wins probably in there to make it, or get lucky in circumstances, right? So in 2 of those, Wisconsin and USC back in 2016, they were ranked 8th and 9th in final committee rankings, and they would have made the at-large team, which shows you, 3-loss teams at 8 and 9 in the ranking. It shows you how the college football that year must have been pretty crazy, right? With very few elite teams that year. So that's kind of on the left. I thought that was interesting. And then top Big Ten teams left out. So this touches on what you were talking about there, JR. And in fact, I put Minnesota there in red. What was my note on Minnesota? So excluding the COVID year of 2020. So COVID year of 2020, you have USC at 5-1. So that's a 1-loss team, but they only played 6 games. Only 1 2-loss team was left out. So for the Big Ten, over the 11 years, only 1 2-loss team was left out of the 16-team field. It was Minnesota, unfortunately, in 2019 when they went 10-2, and they had a ranking of 18 from the committee after the conference playoffs. Just thing that stood out, maybe the one that you could say got screwed the most, if you will, in 2015. Michigan went 9-3. They were ranked 14th. And then others, I just find it interesting. If you look at a rank of 16 or better, Oregon appears there twice with 9-3 records in 2022 and 2015, and they didn't make it. And then Iowa twice as well in 2019. And they went 9-3 in 2021. They went 10-3. So, those are the teams maybe near the top there that you could say maybe they got a little screwed there getting left out. That's where SEC bias could come in, right? I don't have if an SEC team got in over them, but there's probably a good chance that might have happened. But thought this was interesting to show as well.
Yeah, for sure. So I pulled up Minnesota's 2019 schedule, and I mean the issue here is the classic issue we saw even for the 4-team playoffs, and it's what screwed Ohio State in 2023, I think it was. They lost 2 of their last 3 games. Now, 3 of their final 4 games were against ranked teams. So for Minnesota, the schedule just absolutely screwed them that season. They managed to beat number 4 Penn State in November 9th, and then November 16th, they lose at Iowa, who was number 20, and then the last game of the season, November 30th, they lose at home to number 12 Wisconsin, who was number 12. Yeah, number 12. They lose to them. So, I mean, really, if you had that Wisconsin game in September, and then you had, say, that Iowa game could probably still be at the end because, like I said, they beat number 4 Penn State there at the end. If those games are just a little switched up and you have one somewhere else in the schedule, Minnesota probably has a really good shot of making it, but it's the classic issue that happens to teams when their schedule is backloaded, and it was the problem that Michigan could have ran into in 2023 when they had all those games backloaded and Jim Harbaugh was suspended. But I mean, they saved it by winning those games. So yeah, really really interesting to look at that Minnesota situation there. The only team with less than 3 wins in the Big Ten outside of the COVID year to not make it. That's pretty crazy. Okay. What was the other one I wanted to comment on? Okay, the team that seems to show up here in this table 6 the most, I don't have an exact count for it, but Oregon shows up there a number of times, USC a number of times, Minnesota twice, Illinois this past year at 20th. Not as much Michigan as I thought. I thought we might see Michigan in here more, but am I seeing it right? I only see Michigan once.
Only once, yeah.
Yeah, and that was 2015, right?
Yeah.
Right after they lost to Ohio State there at the end of the season. Yeah. So Michigan, I'll have to look up their 2015 schedule, but they could have had a similar scenario to that. Let's see. What are the comments saying? JR says, I wonder if those are a result of poor opinion of the Big Ten West. Same with Northwestern. Oh, it's possible. And you also have to remember Big Ten West teams, I shouldn't say all of them, but sometimes they would not do a great job of out of conference scheduling. And, looking at Minnesota played South Dakota State at Fresno State and Georgia Southern, and they're out of conference that 2019 year. And they every single one of those games was only a 1-score win. So if you want to play, group of 5 and FCS teams and you're out of conference, obviously that can work for you, but you got to really dominate those teams. And I think that was probably a reason why it took Minnesota a little bit longer to get ranked because, their first 4 games were, like I said, South Dakota State at Fresno State, Georgia Southern at Purdue. Those were all 1-score games. Then they managed to destroy Illinois, Nebraska, Rutgers, Maryland, and then have some close games later on there. So, yeah, as much as
I would argue
sucks,
the Big Ten West poor opinion was earned. A combination of just being in the Big Ten West out of definition, and you had time to schedule some tougher teams. The one team that would periodically play some tough non-conference game was Wisconsin. They had LSU. They played Bama back. I know they're playing home and away Bama the last 2 years, but they played Bama even back a number of years. Notre Dame they had. So Wisconsin was willing to venture. You got to have some marquee wins, and it doesn't help when you're playing the offensively challenged other teams in the Big Ten West. It's just I mean, we can say what we want about the Big Ten, but that Big Ten West was just not very good. It just
You know
wasn't.
what team in the Big Ten West scheduled really tough out of conference but doesn't get the credit for it? Purdue. Purdue was playing like
Well,
11 Power Four teams, Power Five teams
and
every
they
year.
also often get Notre Dame. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
Yeah.
2016 they played Eastern Kentucky, Cincinnati, and Nevada. That was before Cincinnati was in the Big 12. But really starting in 2016, and yeah, they were playing some other ones before that. 2015 is when we were still playing 8 conference games. But starting in 2017, they played Louisville and at Missouri, and they're out of conference. Boy, they killed Missouri 35-3 in 2017. Boy, that'd be a fun game to go back and quote. And then they played Missouri and Boston College in 2018. In 2019, they played both Vanderbilt and TCU. That would be a really good
No.
episode there for you, Jeff. Go back
The,
and look at who's played the best out of conference ever since 2014 or something
yeah,
like that.
the other team I give a little pass for in the Big Ten West, Iowa. At least they're playing Iowa State every year, and Iowa State can bounce around a little, but that's a solid, good, Big 12 team rivalry. So, that's a good, solid game, right? I wouldn't call it a
When Iowa
marquee
State is
game,
good,
but
yes.
yeah,
When they're
yeah,
good, yeah.
yeah.
So, all right.
All right.
Few more.
Yeah, okay, yeah. Keep looking up.
I'll just do a couple comments really fast, and then we'll move on. Max says, weird. I don't remember the Big Ten West being that good, but I guess they were odd years every once in a while. I mean, I, it wasn't all that good. I mean, they never won a Big Ten championship. It was kind of like the Big 12. That's what I always kind of compared the Big Ten West to. It was like the Big 12. Like they had some good teams. It was very competitive, but they just didn't have a national championship contender in there. So it was very hard to think too highly of the Big Ten West as like
Yeah.
the
And
winner
to
of
be
the West
clear,
deserves to be in the playoffs.
that table 6 that lists a lot of Big Ten West teams, that's not saying that therefore the Big Ten West was really good. It just means the best of the Big Ten West tended to get ranked outside of what a 16 team current proposed playoff format would allow you to make.
Right.
That's a long way to say it, but so good teams, but just not really good teams, right? I guess would be the way you can look at it.
Mm-hmm. Dave says, should the COVID year even count? The Big Ten had to bend the rules a lot. For Ohio State, personally, I think Indiana should have been in that year. Then you get into the Penn State Ohio State discussion from 2016. Ohio State beat Indiana. They were a game short. And I'm not being dishonest here with you, Dave. I just said Penn State should have been in the year that Penn State beat Ohio State. So I don't think I'm being dishonest or biased there when I say that. But yeah, I mean, if it was a 12-team situation, Indiana should have definitely been in. But I mean, Indiana had their shot to make the playoffs, and all they had to do
Yeah.
was beat Ohio State, and
Yeah.
they didn't. So, and then let's not forget, I won't bring it up. I don't want to make Michigan fans mad. I won't bring it up. Okay, let's go to the next one before I make our Michigan viewers
Yeah.
mad.
So we're gonna look at time permitting 4 seasons specifically to see how this would play out based on a specific season. What better season to look at than the previous year, right? So even in the new 16 team playoff format, the Big Ten still only gets the 4 teams that made it in: Oregon, Penn State, Ohio State, and Indiana. Okay. The SEC not only gets the 3 who made it, which was Georgia, Texas, and Tennessee, but in this format, they also get in Alabama, who's ranked 11th, and Ole Miss and South Carolina squeak in. Now, this is a little goofy. For some reason, they list Clemson as 16th, and I checked it again right before we're on, and yet the committee rewarded Clemson with they didn't go by the rank in saying here's who's filling out the playoff field. They gave them credit for just being in the conference championship or whatever. So that's a little wonky, but that's what the sports reference showed us there. So I realized that might be a little bit confusing. But basically, 6 SEC teams. What's goofy is if you look to the right here, this is what the play-in scenarios would have looked like. You would have Oregon and Penn State with your bye, in essence, your automatic qualifiers. And then to get the third automatic qualifier, you would have number 3 Big Ten ranked Ohio State at 10-2 playing number 6 Iowa, who was 8-4. And Ohio State beat Iowa earlier in the year 35-7. And here Ohio State would have to play them again, and the winner would get one of the auto bids, right? That's pretty wonky in my view, right? This is where this concept of playing games doesn't look that great. Now the other one would have been Illinois at Indiana. Again, Indiana 11-1. Why do I have to play an Illinois 9-3 team? If you're an Illinois fan, though, you're like, this is pretty cool. We beat Indiana. We get one of the 4, right? I just don't like it when you've got a 2-game difference in the loss column between these teams, and they have to play each other for a play-in game. It doesn't feel right. Now, other years it works out better than this, but I just wanted to kind of highlight that. And then the other thing to show is, look at the Big 12 here. The number 12 ranked Arizona State and 17 BYU getting in. So really 2 teams that would not have made, 4-team field for sure. So they're a little fortunate with that. But any thoughts on this one, JR?
Yeah, I mean, I would have loved to see Indiana, Illinois in the playing game. I think that would have been awesome. I think that Ohio State, Iowa would have been a snoozer. I mean, we already saw Ohio State, Iowa earlier that season, and although Ohio State didn't really put them away in the first half, they eventually did in the second half. So, and with Iowa, their quarterback situation the way it was, I mean, they were starting to walk on by the end of the year. Yeah, that one would have been a snoozer. I wouldn't have been interested in that one much, but the Indiana Illinois one. So you got some give and take there with the playing games. I'm trying to look up the SEC standings. What would the playing games look like if the SEC teams played the Big Ten teams? Say you had fourth place in the SEC, which I don't think it's like that here in the rankings, but I guess it depends on what they do. If you're doing fourth in
It'd
the
probably be
SEC,
Alabama.
it
Probably
would
be
be
Alabama. If we were just going by
yeah.
this, it'd be Alabama.
But if you're going by this, then you're also saying, fourth place was Indiana for the Big Ten. So
Yep.
what do we? Or I guess it would have been third place would play third place. So yeah, Ohio State still would have played Tennessee. You'd have Indiana play Alabama. With the way Alabama played against Michigan and Oklahoma, I think Indiana probably wins that game. I know some people are going to call me biased, but I mean, just you see Alabama this season, they were not they were not exactly consistent. Indiana was pretty consistent. So, but yeah, Indiana, and then what do you have? Illinois as the fifth one. It would have been Illinois versus Ole Miss. I think they would have handled Ole Miss. They handled South Carolina, and then Iowa versus South Carolina. Um, yeah, I mean, if they had those as playing games, which I guess it really would only have been the 5 and the 6. So Illinois
Yeah.
versus Ole Miss and Iowa versus South Carolina. I think the Big Ten and the SEC probably go 1-1 in that scenario.
Yeah, I don't like how this one mitigates the regular season too much, I think, and doesn't reward enough. But it's more inclusive. I mean, that's really why the Big Ten is doing this. Tony Petitti, his position was chief operating officer of the Major League Baseball. So 12 teams make the playoffs, 12 of 30. 40% of teams make the playoffs in Major League Baseball. That's where the Big Ten commissioner came from. That's his mindset. I want more teams with access to the playoffs so that more games matter later in the year. And that is true for the middle teams, so that's good for them. But it also means the games matter less overall, right? As far as how much
Yeah.
they matter. And so that's what people worry about as this expands. And it's why I'm like 16. Okay, I don't love it, but okay, no more than that.
Sheesh. Yeah. Um, that's really, really interesting. All right.
All right, let's
Let's move on to the next
let's
one.
go to the next table. Now, I'm going to go to the 2016 season, and it's the first year that more than 4 Big Ten teams would have made the field. So I think this one is pretty interesting. It's the year Ohio State lost to Penn State, and then, what the person was just talking about, and then Ohio State ended up getting rewarded and made the playoffs and got blown out by Clemson. Note that this is the one where Wisconsin and USC were ranked 8th and 9th with 3 losses, but this is the first field that more than 4 Big Ten teams would have gotten the automated bids, right? So this is the third year of the play. Would have been the third year of the 11-team playoff. In the third year, it's the first time more than 4 teams would have got in. And so Ohio State and Washington would get the buys here in the upper right. And in the first round, you would have USC, who's 9-3, playing at number 3 Penn State, 11-2. So I don't mind that, right?
Well, and
their
if you
record,
remember, USC beat Penn State in the bowl game that season.
yeah.
I don't
And
remember if there were any
I don't
opt-outs
mind that
yet.
when I say that their difference in the number of losses is just 1. So and then you'd have Wisconsin as the 5 at 10-3 playing Michigan the 4 at 10-2. Again, this is where that playing games seem to work. So it's going to be hit and miss. I'll just tell you on those playing games whether they really make sense or not, if you will.
So really terrible season for the SEC this year. I mean, Oklahoma was still in the Big 12, but I understand why we're putting them in the SEC for consistency purposes. But I mean, the next best SEC team was 7-4 LSU. That's crazy.
Well, Auburn 8-4, and then Florida 8-4.
Well, I mean that didn't make the playoffs.
After that, yeah. It really jumps down, doesn't it? Yeah,
it does. Yeah, that's interesting. The Big Ten and really USC is the only one that was still in the Pac-12, but they still would have been in it. So, but yeah, all 5 of those teams in the Big Ten in the top 10. That's pretty interesting.
Yeah, and Washington was 12-1 that year.
Oh, Washington too. Sorry.
Yeah. Washington had a real good year.
That Wisconsin Michigan game would have been really good. Penn State beat Wisconsin earlier in the year after getting blown out by Michigan, or later in the year after getting blown out by Michigan earlier in the year. So it really showed the progression of that Penn State team throughout the season, and that they were able to come and beat Ohio State just a couple weeks after getting blown out by Michigan. Just a crazy up and down season for Penn State that year.
Yeah.
So
that's an interesting one. I got 2 more. Let's look at this table 9. This is 2018. This is a big example of how auto bids can really be, in my opinion, bad for college football, but great to what I'll call bail out a conference, frankly. So, and what's interesting, Ohio State left out at 12-1, so they had a great year, but they lost to Purdue 49-20. That was that night in East Lansing, not West. I have the wrong
West Lafayette.
Yeah, that cost them that. And the Big Ten didn't get any in, right? Because then Ohio State still beat Michigan. So in this case, Big Ten goes from 0 to 4, right? You've got Ohio State, Michigan, Washington would have made it, and then Penn State would have made it as a 9-3 team. So this is an example, big time, where James Franklin really would have came out looking good on that one. But the Big 12, this is where they get completely bailed out with the auto bids. So their Big 12 is in the dark blue rows there. So West Virginia was the number 1 ranked Big 12 team, 16th final ranking of the committee after the conference championships games. They were 8-3 overall. And then Iowa would have been the second auto bid. 8-4 Iowa makes the 16-team playoff. Yeehaw. This is where it breaks down, right? And, most years it's probably not going to be a 4-loss, but every once in a while you're going to get something like, like seriously, Iowa State, really? They're going to make it and over some other team. The other one is you got Clemson, of course, dominant team at the time, right? I think that's Deshaun Watson playing in 13-0 and playing Bama. Next, the second team, Syracuse, with a 20 ranking at 9-3. They're the second ACC team to get in. So again, 2018 is a real example where auto bids really don't look that great. we as college football fans want to see the best teams playing the best against best. You're not getting that this year. In some years, that's what this auto bid system is going to create, and that's not good.
Yeah, and I always tell people, to me, I'm willing to take the lumps of a couple years like this 2018 because I do think the auto bids for the conference make teams in that conference more viable for recruits to go to, right? If you only get one team out of the Big 12 in the 12 team playoffs, you're not going to think it's as viable to go to the Big 12 because they're probably only going to get one team in there with that one auto bid. The rest of them probably aren't going to make it. But in this 16 team, even though you got Iowa State at 8-4 with a 24th ranked, I mean, let's be honest. Like, did Iowa State at 8-4 really stand that much better of a chance than Kentucky at 9-3? Or Texas at 9-4? Probably a little bit less, but I don't think either of them were making it anyway. So for me, I'm willing to take those lumps because I do think it provides the Big 12 to have more opportunities to make
Yeah.
it into the
And to be
playoffs.
clear,
Which,
JR, I'm definitely saying this system's great for conferences. It's
yeah,
great for
yeah,
the
yeah. I
conferences,
know
right?
you are.
It's just
Why?
for Big Ten for college football fans don't always love it, really, right?
Why didn't Utah make it right under West Virginia there?
Because of the auto bids.
Right, but
Um,
Utah is Big 12.
um, that's a good question. I mean, that's just how it shook out. Oh, I see what you're saying. Maybe, yeah, I might have gotten the wrong data element there. That's a good point. That's a
Okay,
good
but
point.
still would have been a
Yeah,
Big 12 team. Okay,
yeah, yeah. It's still a four-loss team too, right?
right.
It's still a four-loss team before they even have their bowl game. So the other
Mm-hmm.
thing to highlight too, I forgot, is if you look at the Big Ten play-in games this year, you're going to have the 5 seed Northwestern at 8-5 playing Penn State. And so an 8-5 Northwestern team could find their way into the 4 auto bids if they win at Penn State. Now, are they likely to win at Penn State? Maybe not, but we know in any one game in college football, anything can happen, right? The best team does not always win. And people always think that. And then even Oregon, 8-4 overall, playing, 10-3 Washington for playing chance. These playing things is just not loving it. Not loving
Yeah.
it. I get the reasoning, right? But
Yeah,
just
I don't like the play-ins. It'd be nice if they were Big Ten versus SEC, but yeah, I'm not a big fan. Dave was asking really fast. I think we missed it. Sorry, Dave. He said, in today's playoff format, do you think Western Michigan could have upset somebody with them getting in this one? I believe that's when PJ was still at Western Michigan. Correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, maybe we saw Bowling Green take it to Mississippi State last season. Now Mississippi State was an awful SEC team, but I mean, do I think Western Michigan would have beat, USC or Wisconsin or anybody like that? Probably not. I don't think so. But could they have contended with a Louisville or an Oklahoma State or, a Colorado or something like that?
it looked
Maybe.
oh, in this case, they would be matched with Clemson in like one of the
Yeah.
Clemson's dominant teams. So
Yeah.
um
So they
yeah.
probably wouldn't have competed with the draw there, unfortunately.
Yeah, what I think what you're gonna see is the group of 5 team with a 16 team field is going to play the number 1 seed and get shellacked. And it will be but it's still good. I like giving them that chance, right?
Yeah, me too.
And
I think it's
in fact, I had
good
a
for the
slide
game.
in that. I'm not including that here, but of the 10 who made it, UCF made it twice, like the one mythical championship year, and then another year under Frost, and then another team made it twice. But really, the good news there, it was really spread out amongst
Hmm.
teams, which is great. I mean, that's good for the sport, even though we know they're not going to win it here. But yeah, so you look at this is the final table, 2023. Speaking of that, Liberty 13-0, right? They would have played Michigan, I'm assuming, right? 16 versus a 1 seed. But just another example of auto bids maybe being a little rough. Oklahoma State at 9-4, making it. Arizona at 9-3, making it for the Big 12. Just not loving that. In this case, for the Big Ten, it is interesting. We would have got a fifth team in. Penn State at 10-2. In 2023 would have got in as well. Of course, that's the year they lost to both Michigan and Ohio State, right? But we knew they're certainly a top 16 team, right? One of the best 16. There's no doubt about that. And then if you look at the Big Ten playing games, these are good, actually. You'd have 10-2 Penn State at 11-2 Oregon. And then you got a 10-3 Iowa again against the 11-1 Ohio State team.
Yeah, that Iowa team had no business being anywhere near the playoffs. They're the same team that lost to Penn State 31-0.
Yeah, little wonky,
season.
And that's where you get from the Big Ten West, right? And those little anomalies. So anyway, we thought we'd look at like for the 11 season a little bit more specifically. But so any other comments here? Maybe we can summarize here.
No, not really about the playoffs. I think it's interesting to look at a few like this. Terry did say it would be better to guarantee money to the conferences instead of bids for teams. Yeah, I mean they're getting guaranteed money with how many teams that make it, and I think that really is what it comes down to, Terry, is that you get money for every team that makes it, and so the Big Ten and the SEC, as the teams that make the most money and spend the most money on football, they want to ensure they're going to get the most money, right? So, yeah, I mean I think that is probably the motivation of it all. Personally, I don't know if you agree with that or not, Jeff.
Yeah, I mean, the other conferences know if they get stubborn, that increases the likelihood the Big Ten and the SEC say, you know what, we're just going to go do our own thing.
Yeah, screw you.
And everyone's really screwed. So there's an element of that going on here. But as I said earlier, at first appearance, the Big Ten and the SEC getting 4 auto bids each, like that seems like a power play. But based on the performance of teams through the years, it's about right. They deserve about that number versus the ACC and the Big 12, who don't have, certainly the Big 12 doesn't have the elite teams. They've got more mid-tier. And then the ACC problem, they've been top heavy. Clemson's been dominant. You had Florida State pop the 1 year. Miami's got a chance to maybe pop also and be like a true top 5, at least top 10 team. But they don't have the depth. So ACC getting 2 bids guaranteed a year, it's a good deal for them. Same thing for the Big 12. And obviously, I feel it's a great deal for the group of 5 teams. So, when you think about it, the old system, really 4 teams out of 134 teams making the playoffs only, that does seem ridiculous, right? I mean, that is like extreme. Now we're talking 16 might seem like a lot, but it's 16 of 134 teams are going to make it. I mean, that I didn't do the percentage, but that's what 13% of teams are going to make the playoffs. That's not a lot.
Well, and it makes more sense now because you look back and the days before NIL and transfer portal, teams just loaded up on talent. Alabama's 3 deep was better than Iowa's first team sometimes. I don't know. I just picked Iowa out of thin air. Sorry, I'm not trying to turn this into an anti-Iowa podcast. I know Dave would appreciate that. But as far as I'm concerned, like now that talent is just so much more spread out in college football. It doesn't make sense to only have a 14 playoff anymore. And everybody that argues for the BCS list, like I cannot I cannot believe that people can't get it through their minds that like college football today is different. While yes, there is a lot of money grabbing and stuff that goes on, like there are so many good players at different locations in college basketball or college football today. It's not the same it used to be. It is not Alabama loading up and Georgia and Ohio State loading up. There are so many more teams with good talent that can compete with the big dogs, and so you can't do 4 teams anymore. I think 8 teams probably would have been the smallest you could have went.
I agree.
But,
8.
yeah.
I was really thinking, at first I was an advocate when they talked expansion for 8 because I thought, you got guarantee you can have the conference winners get the Power 5, get the 5 spots, then a wild card or maybe 2 wild cards, and then you reserve one for like a group of 5 or whatever. But the problem is when there's only 8 and you're giving one to a group of 5, that's probably a
Yeah.
stretch. When you're given one of 16, I think that makes more sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
You're seeing what Liberty does. So the bottom line is I think this is a good thing overall for college football. I definitely think it's a good thing for the conferences and even for the ACC and Big 12. We only get to it. The numbers show it's a good deal for them. Take what you can get. And then, even if teams get blown out, so what? They had their shot, right? I mean, that's all you want is your shot. And I think we will see an upset at some point, but you're not going to see more than one upset. Like you see that in NCAA basketball where anyone who makes it to the final 8, you even get dropped. Well, in football, it's magnified when you get pounded on by some of these teams and how physical these playoff games are. You might see one upset, but you're not going to see 2 big upsets, right? But that's
Yeah.
okay. There's nothing wrong with that, and more
Well, and just
access
because just
is
because you don't have upsets doesn't mean teams didn't deserve to
that's
be
right.
there. Didn't
I
didn't
agree.
play a worthy season, So,
That's right. That's
all
right.
right. Couple comments really fast, and then we'll get out of here, Jeff. This is a really insightful, really interesting episode. I enjoyed it. Let's see, where is it? Max is bringing up Josh Pate essentially said what you said. He said Josh Pate just said that Jeff that he suspects the Big Ten and the SEC form their own championship and leave everyone else behind if they don't acquiesce to their demands. Yeah, Josh Pate's kind of been on this train for a little bit. I feel like I've been saying it ever since 2021, which is the Big Ten and the SEC. Ever since conference realignment started happening, I was saying if if the Big Ten and the SEC want to, and I think this is where we're eventually going, you will essentially get an NFL system between the Big Ten and the SEC. I think eventually the Big Ten and the SEC will break away, start their own type of league, super conference, whatever you want to call it. It'll probably feature more than 18 and 16 in the two conferences. I think you'll probably get 20 and 20, something like that. And eventually you'll have, 8 teams from the Big Ten, 8 teams from the SEC, have at it, meet in the middle, and go about it that way. I think that's probably what will happen eventually. But
And I don't disagree. I think the one thing, and others will say that it could be a football only model. I mean, potentially basketball to fall, but then I
yeah,
think
yeah.
they'll end up saying like smarter heads will prevail and say, wait a minute, we can't have volleyball being doing Stanford in the ACC for volleyball or for whatever sport outside of football. Football can work. I mean, the trip coast to coast, they play 12 games, that can work. But so I would see football being unique and then maybe the Pac-12 reformulating in some of these other sports, right? Where you get Pac-12 teams playing Pac-12 teams in softball and baseball and the other sports. So that could be a good thing, right? But I
Which
don't
that's what
disagree.
needs to happen eventually. Is
Yeah,
football just needs to break off. Football
right,
is such a
right.
different money, option. Basketball can get there a little bit too, but
It's in between.
um,
Yeah,
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 it's kind of in
yeah.
between. Women's basketball is getting there as well a little bit, but yeah, not as much. All right, last thing I'll bring up, Jeff, and I don't know if you have any thoughts on this, but I did share some on X, so I'll share them here with Trojan Fight. He said, "What do you guys make of the Xavier Griffin decommitment, 5-star linebacker that decommitted from USC yesterday or the day before?" A lot of side choosing from USC fans. The coaching staff did not want him to going on a bunch of visits while being committed. Jeff, I'll let you share your 2 cents in just a second.
Yeah.
I thought USC is going to lose recruits at some point. They were going after too many. That you were eventually going to lose them. My biggest thing was just don't lose the local guys. Like you're going to lose some eventually. It's not a big deal. I'm not going to freak out about it. But if they start losing 3, 4, 5 local guys, then that's when I'm going to start being a little bit more concerned. As far as the not taking visit stuff, like this is going to happen more in college football. Teams hate this. Teams hate that you commit and then you start taking visits elsewhere. There are certain position groups at Ohio State that say you're not allowed to commit and then take visits elsewhere. That's just kind of how it is. Eventually, I think Ohio State will be like that in general, just like I think USC is getting that way. But then you do have some division within the fans, and USC might even have a little bit of division in the coaching staff too. But I also see from the player's point of view because guess what? If your head coach leaves and he takes his entire staff with him, like he did at Michigan, you want a backup plan, right? Because you want to go play for that coach. You want to go play for that, position coach or whatever it is. So you want to have a backup plan in case something like that happens. But I also get where the coach is coming from, and especially USC because they've had the rug pulled out from under them multiple times. I think you just have to maintain consistency as a staff. Whatever that is, just be consistent as a staff. It helps in recruiting so much more, in my opinion. What do you think, Jeff?
Yeah, I wouldn't overreact to any one decommit. I mean, this is just the world we live in. Every school's going to have some decommits. You're going to have transfers. You don't need to you need to say in the preponderance of our recruiting class, how good is it going? In USC, it's going very well. Although I must say, they're not going to finish with the number one recruiting class. They have the biggest quantity, but their average is really good. But they're probably going to be in the 5 to 10 range, in my opinion. But that's still great and much better than it's been. The other thing is nowadays, how do you prevent a kid from going on official visits? And if anything, if he really liked another school better, it's probably going to mean you would lose him later anyway. Like maybe after the first year, if he's truly not committed to your team anyway, do you really want him enrolling and then being disappointing, losing him after the first year when you finally develop him, let him get his legs a little bit? Because any first-year player, unless you're a Jeremiah Smith, you're usually not, hitting the ground running and having this awesome freshman year. It doesn't happen a lot. So let them go on their official visits. And if it makes them feel better about their current school, it means they're less likely to transfer down the line. And that's a good thing for your program. So I would not fret about this.
Yeah, yeah. Well said, Jeff. Well said. All right. I think that's all we got for tonight, Jeff. Went almost about an hour and a half. I can see Philip commenting right now, telling us 4 hours. Sorry, Philip, not happening. Jeff's got a bedtime. We gotta let Jeff get to bed. Okay?
I am going to come up with it under hour one time but I knew it wasn't going to be with 10 tables. But one time we'll do it.
Yeah. No, this was a great episode, Jeff. Anything else you want to get to before we get out of here?
Yeah, just follow me on X at Big Jeff's FT Ball, bigjeffsfootball.com. I haven't been writing as many articles. I've been buying and selling houses, believe it or not. Personally, I've got a lot going on. I will get back to writing more articles, I promise. But I still have a lot of good stuff out there at bigjeffsfootball.com. So thanks a lot, JR.
For sure. Check it out. And we appreciate all of you being with us. Appreciate Jeff being with us as well. So have a good night, everybody. And if you're listening to this in the morning, like, subscribe, 5-star review on podcasts, all that good stuff. We appreciate it. Have a good one.